Well, thank you, and Lynn, thank you for setting this up so well for me. As we've heard, there are so many different dimensions to this issue. There's food, there's agriculture, there's energy, there's health, there obviously the economic dimensions. You, I'm sure, can think of a few others. And the question really is, how do you put these together in a way that's useful for policymakers? I'm going to talk about a sustainability assessment methodology that's been proposed by a National Academy of Sciences committee that was asked by Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA, to come up with a way to help her put together these different types of issues into a formal framework. Administrator Jackson calls this the Green Book in relation to the Red Book of Risk Assessment, which in 1983 laid out a framework for risk assessment. Let me immediately say that there was risk assessment done before 1983, and contrary to what I found people believed as we went through the committee work, it wasn't that the Academy pronounced in May of 1983, and by June of 1983, everybody was doing risk assessment. It took a while, and as I'm sure, as we move toward frameworks that will incorporate these various dimensions, it will take a while to develop these. One of the things that happened early on as the committee was forming, and the committee was formed in November of 2010 and got its product out, its book out, in September of 2011. That's less than a year, and proves the Academy can move quickly. One of the things that happened was something showed up in Inside EPA, and I give you the source. And the statement was that EPA was late. The report was that EPA was late in responding to a congressional mandate for a risk assessment of biofuels. And we sort of took that as if you will, something in front of us as a goal, because really, if you will, the longer-term goal that we had in mind is so that in the future, Congress would ask EPA and other agencies for a sustainability assessment of biofuels, not for a risk assessment. This extends well beyond the issue of risk, and as we look at all these trade-offs. So that's what I'll be talking about. First, again, as a way to sort of set the stage, I'd like to look forward and think of what would be the history of environmental protection, if you will, of EPA in terms of policy. In other words, the introductory slide in an environmental policy course 30, 40 years from now, and to say that we started with command and control. That's the 1970s. That's basically looking at the very dirty air and dirty water and how to deal with that. Risk assessment, in a sense, was a response to the recognition that even though we couldn't see it and touch it, there were risks out there that we had to measure to be responsive to effective policy and to what society was demanding of us. And that in time, we're going to move into a sustainability period. Perhaps we're in it now. There's already great work being done. I was very encouraged by what we heard about life cycle assessment, and as I'll point out, that's one of the tools that's needed. And this is sort of the evolution, and in part it's because of an evolution of the needs. We no longer have these relatively simple processes that were, well, it's risky, it's coming out from a single pipe or a single smokestack. We need to be able to look across dimensions on kind of problems that we've just been talking about. Well, the statement of task to the committee was what should be the operational framework for sustainability, what scientific and analytical tools are needed, how do you evolve from the risk assessment, risk management framework, and what expertise is needed. And I'll just quickly go through some of these aspects of it. I'm not going to give you a full report at all on this. I will tell you that we sort of finessed the definition issue. As I think we all well know, sustainability is sometimes inhibited by people spending a lot of time arguing over what we mean. Some of the definitions refer to goal, some of the definitions refer to process. We're talking about process here, not goal. So we were talking about sustainability as a process, and what we simply said is that if you go back to the nation's first, if you will, major environmental act, the National Economic Policy Act of 1969, signed by President Nixon, all of the aspects of sustainability are in that act, even though the word sustainability is not mentioned. And we did this in part because we wanted to anchor this beyond any particular political party. This has been supported, this whole national environmental policy approach, all of the issues that we talk about, multidisciplinary, across different boundaries, multi-generational, are in NEPA, and that's where we basically work. I will tell you that I really had very little to do with the final product. A lot of really good people on the committee. But I will take credit for the fact that I ruled out of order any discussion that had to do with how to define sustainability. We defined it. The framework has two levels to it. Just to show you that and then to go through the two levels very quickly, you start with the sustainability paradigm, which is the three, I don't know if there's a pointer or if you need it, but on the upper left there, it's economics, environment, and social. And social, of course, has health in it, and that's a whole other issue we can discuss at some other time. The sustainability principles, which EPA should have, and the legal mandates. Of course, there's nothing that can interfere with carrying out what the laws are. We suggest that EPA needs a vision. That vision should be converted into specific goals and objectives and metrics using indicators as needed. Basically, industry has done a very good job in doing that and saying that they will, by such and such time, have a 2% reduction in the carbon intensity by which they bring their product, and something that you can then measure and see if it's effective. There's obviously cultural issues, there's the assessment and management, and very importantly, a periodic evaluation and public reporting. We need to know if we're meeting these goals. If we're not measuring, we can't really find out whether this is more than just hand-waving, we want sustainability, or is this actually something that has meaning. The actual working is to look through the decisions to be taken, to develop a screening process. We can't expect every single action of EPA to be governed by a relatively complex approach. Most actions will probably not need any major sustainability assessment, but there's scoping and there's stakeholder, everything has to be done with stakeholders, selection of the appropriate indicators and metrics, a look at the trade-offs and the synergy, results to the decision maker, and the usual loop looking at evaluation of outcomes to see what the future decisions are. All this needs to be done with the appropriate tools. I'm embarrassed that health impact assessment is not on this list, but it's certainly one of the tools that should be used. We've certainly heard a lot about some of these. Life cycle assessment, risk assessment is one of the tools that is important for the sustainability assessment, but many more need to be developed. I go back to the risk assessment framework, the 1983 paradigm, which has exposure assessment, and point out that it wasn't until, I think, 1986 that the first Society for Exposure Analysis was formed. It wasn't until the 1990s that EPA actually reorganized itself so that it has an exposure analysis formal organizational program. This took a while. Very important is the example of the Risk Assessment Forum, which basically sat down with all the players across the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and hammered out agreement about whether you extrapolate from animals to humans by body area or weight or the square root of the phase of the moon or whatever it was that needed to be considered, but so that it was all being done in the same way. And again, we heard some of that with life cycle analysis, and certainly we're going to need that for environmental justice tools, for a lot of the other issues that are, a lot of the other tools that are needed for the assessment. So let me finish by going back to where I think we are. I really think we are on the cusp of developing these new tools. We need to, if we're going to face the kind of challenges we've heard. For EPA, that's one agency. It's, if you will, a relatively simple way of putting what its goals should be under the newer approaches that it's talking about, is that an EPA someone in the EPA, in the agency approaching an environmental issue should think of it not just of how to diminish risk, but rather how to maximize benefit, of which diminishing risk is just one part of what needs to be done. And I think that type of breadth, which is now being considered by other agencies, there's an interagency group and the usual task forces being formed, that type of breadth of an approach is what we need for these kind of challenges such as biofuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. Now we'll hear from Dr. Jackson.